In terms of housekeeping, I'm going to have to wing it. I do have quite a good run of having fire alarms going off when I'm chairing. So if that happens, I know what to do. And it is to go out onto the grass and follow everybody else until the bells stop.
It's not on yours. There you go.
If it's long and strong, get going. Well, I think David, you know all about earthquakes because you're from Wellington. But we have, you might not know that we've got Tiffin Park up here on the hill, and that's where we go if the shaking's too bad. So I don't have any track record on that one. So there we go. But drop, cover, and hold beforehand. We talked about evacuation. Wharepaku, just down the corner, and we are being live streamed. So welcome to any online viewers, and welcome to Tracy, Di, and Thompson online. And we're expecting Councillor Curtin fairly shortly, and welcome Councillor McIntosh. Welcome staff. Welcome Dr. Nick. Welcome Stephanie. Right. So, do we have any apologies? I have an apology from Councillor Councillor Ormsby. Do we have Thompson's online? Kia ora, Thompson. Are you able to provide karakia for us?
Kia ora, tēnā tātou. Arohaina mai te tai au te tai a Tīnana atu. Apologies for this morning. I'll be joining later in the morning. But certainly Councillor Haringham able to offer karakia this morning.
Kia ora.
Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hiaki ana te ātākura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, tihei, mauri ora. Mauri ora.
Kia ora, Thompson. Right, conflicts of interest. Do we have any this morning? There are none. Look, and just once again, David Nalder, welcome. Thank you very much for making the journey. Had a lovely chat with you before about why it's so good to be in Hawke's Bay. nice to see you, and really welcome your expertise today. Thank you. Right, so confirmation of minutes of the previous meeting. Do we have any amendments? Okay, if there are none, do I have a proposer to accept the minutes, please?
I'm happy to do that.
Thank you, Stephanie. And a seconder. Thank you, Councillor McIntosh. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Right, so we can move on to risk management refresh. Who's going to take us through this?
If I can introduce through you, Chair. So the purpose of what we're doing today, and I invite David Nalder and Helen to the table. David is an external risk consultant, as you're all aware, that's been helping us to refresh and reinvigorate the way in which we manage risk at HBRC. This has been now an 8-month journey for us, using both a bottom-up and a top-down view to identify what we believe at HBRC is to be the key things that matter to us. So we're trying to move away from the statement of risk that no one engages with. We have tried to move to a model introduced through David around uncertainties and to really get a top-down, bottom-up view. So we are very clear with Council and the public as to what's the uncertainties, what do we believe is the most important things for us, and moving through enhancing how we track that in the insurance mechanisms. I'm going to hand over to David, who's going to take you through where we're at with that profile, a current view as to what we believe those uncertainties are, and then pass that back for any questions. Over to you, David.
Thanks, Susie. Marina Koto. Thanks, everyone. I think we have around 40 minutes for this, and I appreciate that it's quite a chunky paper that you have in front of you. So what I wanted to do is take the opportunity to walk through the paper, which is in 4 parts, and really happy to take questions as we go rather than leave them to the end. So feel free to interrupt and ask as you go. So the 4 parts of the paper is, first is a recap on the core principles underpinning the approach that we're taking for risk management here. And it's really important to re-emphasise the why we're doing this and the philosophy that underpins how we've approached the concept of risk and how it plays out in a real way across the council. Second part is the work to date. Then we've presented the current risk profile, and I'll talk about how we've arrived at that and the key themes arising from that. And finally, there's a deep dive into 2 specific areas, with the one-page management plans as a way of providing the transparency and the underlying detail that goes to describing specific areas of uncertainty or risk. So first, the concepts. A really important part of this is considering risk as being neither good or bad, defining risk in terms of uncertainty in the future relating to something that we care about. And that uncertainty could lead to a positive upside or a downside threat. So how that plays out is you'll see on the risk profile that's presented on page 9 and 10 that the language in that is very much around the extent to which, so it reflects an underlying area of uncertainty or something that needs to be managed that contributes to the success of Hawke's Bay Regional Council and enables the council to deliver on its purpose and mandate. For simplicity, where I use the word risk, the common usage of the word risk, what I mean is uncertainty tied to success. The purpose of this is to provide a really simple way for everyone to focus on the handful of things that really fundamentally matter. So the idea behind the risk profile presented as a dashboard is to enable that visual representation of what matters the most to the council, what success looks like, and the major areas of uncertainty, i.e. risk that contributes to that, with a regular point-in-time snapshot of the relative confidence and concern of both the executive and council. So that's the real purpose behind this. And it's intended to provide a common understanding and transparency, so we're all talking about the same things and focusing on the same things. The second part of that is one-page management plans that provides the detail, the substance around what that area means, why it matters, how it's managed and controlled, how it's monitored. And 2 examples of those are in the back of the report. Page 3 gives an overview of the work to date. There's been an extensive set of engagement across the organisation. In essence, there's been work with ELT to really agree on those concepts, develop the dashboard, allocate out clear points of accountability, and there are 2 points of accountability there. Everything on the dashboard, i.e. every one of the key risks for the council has an ELT owner. That ownership at ELT is to ensure that the right people are brought to the table to build the management plan for that area of risk and to bring that to ELT table for decision making. Then there's a risk lead, which is the person who manages, typically subject matter accountability and manages that page, so it's a live dynamic document. We're looking to move away from a point where risk reporting is a static, quarterly, backwards looking exercise to something where the risk profile is a real-time dynamic view of the current state, with the management plans being true management plans that are used. So there's been an extensive set of workshops across the organisation to build those plans. And that's achieved 2 purposes. One is that's been the main way in which we've raised the awareness and shared the concepts throughout the broader organisation, particularly at a Tier 3 level. And it's developed the starting point for the understanding what the critical elements of the controlled environment are that manage risk. So the other component of this is risk scoring, whereby we undertake a regular sentiment survey. So what that is it seeks periodically a view across the organisation as to the extent of confidence or concern associated with those critical areas of risk on the dashboard, which enables ELT to focus the conversation both not only at high areas of potential concern, but also where there's a divergence of views, because a divergence of views is a good indicator of either some area of emerging risk or where there is a difference in perspective that needs to be understood and addressed. What I might do is you'll have the papers in front of you. What I'll do is I'll just put up on screen if I go to view a second. So where are we at the moment? So the risk profile is presented on page 9. Essentially, we have 26 areas. From the workshops, we've identified roughly 200 specific causes, if you like. So these are the major areas that contribute to those 26 areas of uncertainty. We've identified quite a significant number of critical controls, which we are using to build a control library. The purpose of that is to then focus a program of controls assurance to build confidence that the things that have come out of the work with management to date to identify the main processes and controls in place that manage risk, that there's confidence that those controls are designed effectively and operating as expected. So that's the work from here. We're at the point whereby we've got a good description of what the risk profile for the organisation is. We've got a point where we've got the perspectives of ELT and council as far as relative level of confidence and concern. We have one-page management plans identified or developed for each of those areas of risk on the dashboard. We're now at the point where we're looking to consolidate the initial understanding of controls that's come through that work, and to confirm, put a program of controls assurance in place to confirm that those controls are fit for purpose. I thought I might just pause and happy to take any questions around the general philosophy and the approach that we've adopted to date.
Yeah,
Question?
oh. This isn't really a comment in respect to the process, which we've all been involved in and is robust, I'm sure. It's really just a more broad one that I could ask at any time, so I'll ask it now. We had a presentation at the deliberations we had in respect of the rates review, and the presentation presenter said, you guys just need to focus on keeping us safe, straight out of our manual, and we're not that safe at the moment. Forget it, crudely, forget everything and make us safe, with particular reference to flood control. And so my question is, I'm interested in your comment on where we sit at the moment, given that actually we all know that, but there's two things. One is that we need to have a robust plan to have a better flood control set up than we have at the moment, and we're working on that. The other component to it is money. It's being able, we might be able to say, okay, this is what we need to do to make ourselves safe in respect of a flood, and it's going to cost X $100 million, and X $100 million is quite a lot more than the rate take each year. So as an organisation, kind of, how does that work? In terms of our exposure to stuff. So we can figure out what we believe a good solution should be. There's a big number associated with that. We have no ability to fund that big number. So how does that work?
broadest, if you look at risk as being uncertainty, you can't manage uncertainty down to zero for everything. So there's no way where you can essentially reduce risk to zero. What this is intended to do is give good information to enable you to make the right trade-off decisions within the resources that you've got available. So, for example, by taking the logic to say, well, what matters to us? Well, we need the trust and confidence in the community that we serve, and we need to deliver on our promises. Part of that is around flood protection. The mechanism to do that is around how we manage catchments. There are some choices to be made as far as the extent of resources available to devote to flood protection, for example. This risk approach is designed to say, well, it's not the only area of uncertainty that we need to manage. And also with respect to flood protection, we need to have real clarity around the nature of management practices and controls in place to achieve that, confidence around what we've got in place, or some understanding around where there's a residual gap that we need to focus on. So the intention behind this whole risk approach is to enable it to be a decision-making tool and to enable some clarity around those trade-off choices that need to be made.
So that's helpful, but one further follow-up question is that, in interpreting what you're saying, it's really saying we need to do the absolute best that we can with the resources available. In terms of the trust and confidence of the public is concerned, there may still be a gap between that and trust and confidence in the public. So we may get 60% of the answer, and that, you know, in the eyes of many of the public, that may not be a satisfactory outcome. Probably too hard to answer.
Well, what it does do, because there's on that dashboard, which is effectively the risk profile, there are several things. One is around catchment management, including flood protection. One is actually around communication with stakeholders and actually communication with the public. There'll be reconciling different competing needs and adequately meeting the needs of all stakeholder communities is not always possible either, but the communication and the understanding around the rationale behind trade-off choices that are made, which is a fundamental part of risk management, I think is what this is looking to help with.
Maybe if I just offer a comment, Jock and David, and this is, you know, like you, Jock, I think about this a lot in terms of trust and confidence and social licence, and looking back at the dashboard, it reminded me that we did have that conversation at the time, and that is why the headlines are just under it, the healthy environment and prosperous community. Trust and confidence is right up there at the top. So the challenge for us is to how we use this framework, I think, to actually drive, you know, particularly council, well, the whole organisational and council concerns around that trust and confidence and giving the community in a post-cyclone context what it needs and wants. So I don't, yeah. So, but I think if we have that framework, that we work within that framework, we find that it's limiting, then we change it. But it's in there. It's right at the top at the moment. Stephanie.
Question in terms of the role of this committee and ensuring that the risk management system is working effectively, and the key to that, from my perspective, is around the assurance piece and it controls assurance piece. And you've put in the summary side, the last bullet point talks about the enterprise control library and establishing a focused program of controls assurance. Do you have a sense of time frame on that? And perhaps that's not a David question, is that a Susie question?
Yeah, so we've got a program of work probably within the next 6 months, or certainly in the next 2 months, to document common controls across the business. There are lots of common controls. There's also, I believe, you know, we need to identify the key controls. Sometimes there is only a process. So probably within the next 2 months, identify the commonalities. Certainly within the 6 months, confirm the suite across the organisation. And that includes starting the program of work to re-verify and test those key controls outside of the quality management processes that we have.
So in terms of our function, and where we sit in that assurance piece, it's really going to be 6 months until we're starting to see, the full business as usual starting to run in this new process, yeah?
Yeah, so we have across the business, we have people performing reconciliations, we have people performing quality assurance mechanisms, we have our external reviews. There is assurance mechanisms there, it just hasn't been coordinated in such a way into this new profile to demonstrate the assurance. I am in no doubt we need to improve on the control testing, which is a program of work that will be implemented in due course. But there is assurance mechanisms in place. It is just not well documented and displayed in such a way for this forum in the current format.
Susie, I'm just wondering whether it be possible to just carry that forward as an item, just
Yeah, sure.
specifically focus on the
Yeah,
next
sure.
meeting, just to give us an explainer about
Yeah, sure.
what that looks like in the contract.
Yeah.
Any questions? Carry on.
I'll lead you to pages 9 and 10. So 9 and 10 are two views of the same thing. Essentially the one-page dashboard, which is the risk profile of council. The first page is the perspective of ELT resulting from their sentiment survey. And the second page is the perspective of council, coming out of the results of the council sentiment survey. What you'll see there is that there are the way to interpret this page is that the overall colour of the box represents the relative level of confidence or concern. Essentially, the line between yellow and amber is yellow is we can live with it, amber is we'd want to do something different. Green is we're comfortable with where we're at, and red highlights areas for immediate focus and attention. The shaded box shows a consistency or alignment of view. The trend there is that there's a relatively a higher level of concern shown out of council than ELT, and I'd be interested to just hear the perspectives of the Risk and Assurance Committee as far as what you think might be behind that. I will note though, and I'm interested in that we had a response rate of 4 from 12, so I'd be also interested as you've completed that, or for those who received the link to complete it, what perspective on the sentiment survey and any barriers that you might have encountered that prevented a higher response rate.
So I might just kick off thanking David, because that's something that I was going to raise. So frankly, 4 out of 11 is appalling. There's no better way to describe it than that. So council laws need to improve their game. 4 out of 11 is not a valid sample size to make a comparison. It's interesting. So obviously got my interpretation of this would be those who worry more responded, those who didn't. That may be one way of looking at it. But we don't know, we simply don't know. So I will be asking Hinawai and Nick to, for the next survey, to require higher standards of the councillors. But also I think that there was some...
Might be beyond my remit, Chair, to require things of councillors, but yeah, I know what you mean.
I think Hinawai is within her remit. So what I will say though is that I think there's potentially some unnecessary barriers in the survey as it went out. The front page of it is almost impenetrable for someone who's not hooked on risk. So I think we can make it a little bit less scary. My understanding was it was supposed to be an intuitive kind of a survey, but it's a very highly structured upfront with a lot of verbiage that's actually quite hard to digest. So I think if we can look at the formatting. I have a question just generally about the frequency of surveying as well. And I understand from your comments, David, that that about making this approach drive our business and not just be a tool that sits on the shelf. And so more regular sentiment surveying makes sense in that context. But I just wonder whether, both for ELT and for councillors, whether monthly is overkill or not.
The cadence that seems to be a good balance is typically a monthly cadence for ELT to keep it front of mind and to identify things that are moving quickly. A lesser cadence for council, I think, is appropriate, and that could coincide with the cycle of Risk and Assurance Committee meetings so that we get the signal in order to focus the conversation appropriately at this forum.
And look, I think that's what management set out to do in constructing, building up to this meeting. It's just that councillors didn't join the party.
Yes.
But I think, in all fairness, that just having another look at that survey may help.
And the logic behind the survey is it should be a very simple exercise, essentially just describing a number from 1 to 10 against each of the 26 statements. The reason why it's so fundamentally important is because the broader the perspective, the more reliable the results, and therefore the real ability to focus on areas not only of concern, but also identify areas where there is a good degree of confidence. I'm conscious here around symmetry, right? We often focus on the reds and on the negatives. This is actually intended to be a confidence-building exercise as well by looking at the totality of the things that matter and having a perspective around the things where there's a general degree of comfort and understand and providing through the one-page management plans, the transparency on what those critical controls are that provide the comfort, and then focus the work and the effort and the conversation around those small handful of things that do require some attention. So by having a broad base of people to complete it, it's a much better result. And by having a regularity to it, where it's built into to the normal meeting cycle, it gives you the information that you need essentially to do the job.
Sure. Look, I did complete the survey, but can you tell me if I'm not one of the 4, because I'm technologically challenged too, and maybe that didn't come through. But so 4's no good. Need to do it again. Need all of us responding to that. That's my answer to that. In respect of the gap, in fact, is it that unusual? The staff are intimately knowledgeable about the controls in place. We're not, other than via this reporting. And if you are intimately knowledgeable about what's happening, you are likely to have a higher degree of competence than if you're not.
That's right, and that's why this is useful to know which of the supporting plans are appropriate to bring forward to this forum to provide that level of understanding around control. So that's how it will be used.
Just to further sort of add to the discussion, I'd take us to page 5 of David's report, and that's where we get a comparison between the executive leadership team versus staff perception of risk, and the comment that again there's a higher level of optimism from ELT than staff. So that does tend to align with councillors versus ELT. I'm just interested in when I saw that, David, my question was for you, is this a normal thing? Or is that something that is a red flag in your experience?
No, it's entirely normal. And in the workshops, so the workshops were really good. There was great engagement. We had between half a dozen or 10 people in the workshops. So I arranged people across the organisation for each of the specific topics. And so I'm not surprised that there's a higher degree of concern in general that comes through when you're really picking apart the topic. And the role that Helen and I play, of course, is to challenge back on the controls, and therefore through that conversation, areas where there are potential for improvement come through, and that tends to colour when we look for the people in the workshop to provide their relative perspective of confidence or concern. Generally, they tend to be more towards the amber red side than ELT. ELTs also typically in organisations that have adopted this approach have a broader perspective. So rather than rating the area of risk or uncertainty in isolation, they look at it in the context of everything that's going on within council. and that's I think, appropriate.
Right, so we've, can't exactly tell what the time is right at the moment with my watch doing funny things.
10:32.
So is there anything else you want to bring up before we just sort of open the floor and go for any other questions that might not have transversed?
The questions which I'd like, or the feedback I'd like is looking for confirmation from the Risk and Assurance Committee that the nature of information that this approach is consolidating and providing to you gives you the right risk and control information to enable you to undertake your role. So looking for your perspectives on that. And any particular comments that you might have around the key themes that have come out of the work to date, or the 2 areas of focus that are in the back of the report, being health, safety and wellbeing, and capability and capacity of suppliers and partners. Any particular questions on those areas?
Jock, you?
Just to have an overall comment as someone who's relatively new to the patch. There was a heck of a lot of detail to be over when you're, and I realise it's been refreshed, and I'm just scared within that context sometimes you'll miss the big stuff because there's so much to be over. The extent of information we're receiving, my question is is all that really necessary, or is it, it'd be better to have a sort of...
So, if you mind, can I answer that, Zen? So, with the assistance, obviously, of David, you've been receiving more information on the process, the background, the sentiments, the comparatives. Going forward, you will just see the dashboard and you will see 2 examples of a deep dive. So, there will be streamlined papers coming forward. What you're just seeing to help as we go through this change or methodology and implementation, you're seeing everything that goes with that to help with your understanding. So that is why you're probably seeing more at the moment around background, but going forward you won't.
A question?
Yes? Yep.
Or a comment in response to your question, perhaps just on the 2 deep dives on the capability and capacity of the service providers and the health and safety detail. If you look at one of our core functions is ensuring the effectiveness of the risk management framework by looking at that control and assurance piece, I can't see enough detail on that in the deep dives, and that does concern me. It seems like in the cause section around some of those controls and mitigations, there's things in there that I might have expected to see that aren't, and there's in the monitoring column items to be determined, and the assurance is not yet identified. So is this still, well, I can answer the questions I'm asking it. It seems very much in draft format still. Is that the case, and when are we going to get some detail around that? And it's perhaps not a question for you, David, perhaps it's for Colin.
It certainly is in draft, and there'll always be an element of draft about it because they're intended to be live plans. Over time, the quality of information in it and the degree to which the controls are described is intended to get better and improved. This is the first cycle, so the workshops that were held were to get people up to speed with the approach and to build out the starting point. Most of the discussion is focused on defining the uncertainty or risk and the problem at hand that needs to be managed. The second set of workshops focus more around defining the controls and how they're monitored and assured. Those one-page plans have been developed to around about a 70 or 80% stage, and I think that's good for this stage of the rollout program. I would hate to get to a point where they're seen as complete, because if they're complete, they'll become static.
Yeah, sorry if I made that. If I take your point on that, And I thought that was the case. I just hope from the perspective of this committee that that cadence continues. It's obviously got off to a hiss and roar, and there's been a lot of work done and good structure put in place, but the key for us is that assurance and control piece, and we really need to see some more detail on that to help us satisfy ourselves that that framework is working. So I think that ties into the risk culture that we've been discussing previously, and I guess my query is, how are you guys ensuring, as a leadership team, that risk culture is being embedded so that everyone's still got an appetite to drive this thing through as much as possible?
Through you, Chair. For me, that really starts with ELT, and so ELT getting used to this way of working. We have lots of controls and assurance in place, and I think Susie's brought a fresh look to those alongside David. Some of the sorting out of assurance and controls is wood for the trees, so we need to focus on the things that are the most critical for the organisation. Absolutely, there's some more to articulate and hear around assurance. For culture, I think it works in several different ways. That there's a cultural approach for managers, and then there's a cultural approach for individuals. And individuals are often not worried in their individual job about the level at which these risks are described. They're worried about we want them to be worried about, have they filled in the right health and safety assessment? Are they using their purchase cards correctly, whatever it might be? They're not going to look at the bigger picture of that. So the cultural piece of that is making it relevant to people's work, because if it becomes a giant machine, people switch off pretty quickly. So I think there's a dual approach. There's a leadership from the top, and then the detailed pieces are much more about how we make individual controls relevant to people's jobs. I don't know, Susie, you might have some more you want to add.
There is, yeah, I mean, what I will say is now we have these one pages, this is now appended going forward to the ELT agendas, so that the decisions that we make in ELT are linked to the risk profile in its own right. So previously we haven't had the luxury of that in its new format, that we will be doing that going forward. But I do agree with Nick, we need to make it relevant, we need to drive the culture, controls and discipline around that going forward.
Sam, actually, sorry, just one other further point, actually, notwithstanding my comment earlier about the detail of reporting. I mean, we should take a heck of a lot of comfort in the extent of background work that has gone into this refresh. You know, sitting on this committee, that's really comforting to know that. And equally, with regard to my comment before, actually part of the outcome of that is going to be easier reporting for us. So those are two very good things that have happened.
Yep. So just in terms of the framework, I just want to make a couple of comments. One was that, and Susie, you raised the question about what does this committee want to see in the future. So, look, I do have a specific comment on the health and safety and wellbeing deep dive. But before I get into that, what I want to say is that these deep dives are very useful. This is already giving us another frame in which to analyse, to identify areas of concern and know that they have management attention and oversight by councillors. So it's a great system. It's working already. There's a couple of bits of the system that I think we're missing at the moment, and one of them is a way of tracking areas, change in areas of concern over time. And so once we've had a deep dive in an area of concern, how we can track progress with that over time. So it just needs some kind of a system to track what we've looked at, track and prioritise what we look at next. And that might just be something that falls out of each of these meetings. But that process of, well, and what happened then.
Can I offer a suggestion? Because what we can't do is look at this in isolation. This in isolation is not how we are managing risk in this organisation, and there needs to be links from councillors back through the other committees. So the way in which, what we are surfacing here is what management councillors believe are uncertainties for us. But the way in which we commit to the communities and what we say to the community and to our ratepayers is through our levels of service. So we set the plan, we set levels of service. Those levels of service are the commitment that we've made to the community. We're going to spend your rates and this is how we're going to do it. So that there in itself is a framework by which we can manage where we think we're not meeting the public perception. So that is reported through the corporate and strategic. That's organisational performance reporting, that's level of service. So what we need to do is get really good at linking, I see financially we are not, tangata whenua, this is just an example. We need to link potentially metrics of levels of service where we say we are enhancing cultural competency or engagement with tangata whenua. Where are we not doing that in the corporate and strategic or financial? How does that link back to where we say there's an uncertainty? How do we bring that one pager back then? That is the link between this organisation and the various council committees. So we can't sit here in isolation thinking that this committee is going to manage risk. It is happening on the other committees, and you need to bring from those committees back to this one. I have seen this, I'm not happy with that financially. Can you bring this to the audit and risk and provide us with assurance that you are managing this? So we can't do it in this committee in isolation. That's what I wanted to say.
Look, and I think one of the issues behind this is around level of service, and this will obviously be reviewed through the LTP. But we're dealing with a bunch of level of service statements that are pre-cyclone that reflect a different reality, and we now have, great expectations from the community to be really, really focused on putting right what needs to be putting right and focusing on on priorities that are different now. But our level of service statements probably don't reflect that well enough. So it all has to be integrated. So that was one part of the system in terms of just actually be able to, this committee monitor over time progress through this. Otherwise, we'll just get lost. We won't be able to remember what we did and whether anything happened or not. And the other one is at the higher level is the, what are we calling them, risk appetite. So the question is, so at the top of this, we have the concept of what is the risk appetite of the organisation. And I have already noted in the papers that there's a conflict between papers about whether that's being set by the ELT or set by the council, but it seems that it's an area that this committee needs to understand. Actually, the whole council needs to understand that, and it's a kind of missing link in terms of fleshing that out. Whether we've already, and there's argument to say that actually that appetite's already set through our level of service statement process. But we need to understand that and make sure that it makes sense so that we can, as a one stop, we can see that our risk management framework is integrated with, from the top right through the bottom. So, look, this is a conversation we've already had around the edges of this committee. So, David, I'm interested in just a quick view from you about how we might attack that, and Susie, perhaps, or Nick, you may have some views as well.
Thanks, Anne. In a very fundamental sense, the way to view a risk appetite statement would be a method by which council agrees the parameters it sets for management to operate within, and the point at which essentially the risk profile is outside of an agreed set of tolerances that you can live with that requires escalation and discussion. The best way to achieve that is to start with a way of describing that in qualitative terms that translates to hard and fast quantitative measures. If those quantitative risk appetite measures and your levels of service delivery become one and the same, then through existing organisational performance reporting, you have a way to know whether or not at a point in time you're operating within the agreed parameters, i.e. risk appetite, that the governance body, council, is setting for management. So I would look first at being really clear around what a risk appetite represents, agreeing the approach to develop it in quantitative terms that is meaningful for the commitments you've made to the community. Levels of service and organisational performance reporting presents an existing method to integrate that, and then use that as part of the wider reporting back to Council and the Risk and Assurance Committee. You'll note on each of the one-page management plans on the right-hand side of it where it's got monitoring and there's some outcomes and metrics. That also provides the way to link risk appetite in there so that on that page, against the outcome and the metric, where there are tolerances defined, those become essentially the risk appetite for each of those specific statements or areas. Ideally, they would leverage on your existing levels of service, or if the levels of service aren't sufficient to provide a risk appetite definition for those topics, to develop them.
Thank you. Susie, do you want to add anything? No, okay. So I just think that, and I'm interested in other councillors, what they feel about this, but it just seems to me that it's a gap in terms of our ability what this committee could benefit from is coming back with an explanation or articulation of how we've either already achieved that, articulating our risk appetite as a council, because I don't think we're there yet. I don't have a clear understanding that we've achieved that at the macro level, and I doubt that all of our other councillors have that view. So my feeling is that is a specific action to bring back to the next meeting to either explain, articulate clearly that councillors can understand we're either there or there's a gap still. Yep.
Agree.
Thank you. We're good? Nobody online?
No, I would like to comment.
Okay. Councillor Curtin.
Thank you. Apologies for later. I'm looking at the framework and nowhere does it mention road cones. So I just come from a whole series of, it was me being facetious to start with, they're a risk to life and limb. I've been around the table on risk and audit on this council for 20 years and on others as well, and I just feel as though we go round and round and round. I've seen iterations of risk profiles and processes before, probably 6 of them, and each time they're equally underwhelming and equally disappointing in terms of delivering what we want to deliver. I probably landed looking at this for the sections I could actually read. My eyesight's not so good. I've landed on a couple of points that I think are worth pursuing with greater vigour than the blizzard that we're facing. I've come to a conclusion that we are examining across the board far too much, and I go to your comment, Susie, around everything else we do and the confidence we have in that. So I'm talking about our internal, external reviews, our internal auditing processes, management processes, if you like, those assurance mechanisms that are there already. And it's, in my view, it's about having faith and confidence in them and allowing them to do their work. We've got some good ones here. Those internal reviews, etc., are showing things that give me assurance about how we are financially managing, how we're delivering against our statements. So I'm confident in those things. I don't know whether I need to have explicitly examined through this process. What are we're talking about? This one for about 16 different parameters that are on the pager. I don't know if we need that. I think we ought to have confidence in what we've got. But the thing that, and it struck me looking at the ELT perspective and the council perspective, as slim as it was, and nevertheless it reflects something which was important. And I'll go to it. The thing that I'm really wanting to focus on is, and I don't know why it specifically sits in biodiversity, but health, safety, resilience and welfare of people is sitting under biodiversity, or I think. All I've done is expanded that to say health, safety, resilience and well-being of people and the environment, and leave it at that we focus on that, and a lot of things fall out of that if we enable and allow and have confidence in everything else we do. If we focus in on that, we get the big picture. And I'm seeing the responses from councillors reflecting a nervousness and uncertainty around the external risks, where staff, the ELT, are focused on internal risks. So when you break down into the section health, safety and resilience and wellbeing of people, where the ELT is focusing on those elements internally, so our staff wellbeing, etc. Councillors, in my view, are focused on the community and their wellbeing, health and safety. So I land on the place that is our most important, if you like, auditing, monitoring role in that sense, and then that we allow all the other stuff to be done elsewhere. And why I land on that is that none of the 6 or so frameworks that I've seen in 20 years has helped us mitigate the risk of water contamination in Havelock North. It didn't help us a lot in understanding our vulnerabilities in the cyclone. It didn't help us a lot in terms of understanding the risk to the environment around it didn't pick up breakout of TB, and there are other incidents that it didn't actually deliver in terms of identifying our most exposing risks. So I'm drawn to a much more simplified model that starts off at protecting the health and well-being and lives of both the staff and the general public, and that being a major focus, and leaving the rest to the other processes we've got in play. That's where I've landed in terms of arriving at if you like, a functional, workable risk framework.
So look, maybe I could just respond before David, you might want to make some comment on that. But as I see it, that's the responsibility of us as councillors to set this, and we've gone through a process of agreeing the overall framework with the ELT, and which starts off with trust and confidence in the community. We've got to try and make that work. We've got a responsibility that's organisational for its organisational risks, and we've got a responsibility to the community to deliver what the community. And so there's 2 levels of responsibility, as I see it. So our challenge as governance is to work at that top level and make sure that what we need, and you're absolutely right, there's a risk of a disconnect and there's a risk that actually we get lost in the weeds. We do need, from a risk and audit point of view, we do need the weeds. But our challenge is to make sure that helicopter view comes through.
Just before, through you, Chair, I think the thing that I take away from this as a CE is we don't look at this in isolation. The work that council does as a whole to set its priorities through its LTP, agree those priorities with the community, it is a layer above all of us. And this has a specific role around particularly the way the organisation functions. But audit and risk in itself is not going to be the place where the organisation sets the priorities for what it does and what it focuses on. What I think you're all pointing to is how do those two things kind of connect together, and being able to draw that line. So I think the debate the council has raised is a valid debate to have, and it's probably a how do the priorities of the organisation get set discussion, of which risk frameworks and uncertainty contribute to that, but aren't the be all and end all. That's my simple view of it, but happy to.
Look, David, I suspect it might be something that sits more in our domain than yours, but you're welcome to have a crack if you'd like.
Just two brief comments. One is there are actually two perspectives of safety risk reflected in here. One, the external, which is reflected on the page in number D, we keep our community safe. And then the internal, which is reflected in number 10, health, safety and wellbeing of our people. So there is an external view and there's an internal view. More broadly, any risk system has a challenge in that it's got to provide relevant, meaningful information, and it's got to be broad enough to avoid the danger that you only focus on the so-called the top handful of risks. A traditional way of doing risk is to report top 10 risks, and the problem with that is that what you don't necessarily do is anticipate the things that may well be important or could impact you in the future, unless you do a broad-based approach to anticipate things. That's why black swan risks are such a thing. It's easy to think about the things that could happen, the things that take you by surprise, or the things you haven't thought about. This approach was deliberately designed to say, well, let's consciously think about all of those things that could impact on us as an organisation, and in particular, prevent us from delivering on our promises to the community and keeping the community and the environment healthy and safe. And that's the whole logic behind why we start with that overarching statement, healthy environment and a resilient, prosperous community, i.e. trust and confidence for the community that we serve. A handful of statements that really describes what success looks like, including that keeping our community safe, and then a dozen and a half or so major things that contribute to all of that. So there's a balance here between getting those statements on the page right so it orientates the conversation at Council, Risk and Assurance and ELT, and that's what we've endeavoured to do. So where there are things that you think should be reflected on here to drive the right conversation, then very, very keen to hear that so we can reflect it on there. There's also a need to see the wood for the trees, which is why it's a handful, 24 odd statements of the major areas, and then they're expanded into the specific risks, causes and the like within the one-page management plans and how it's controlled. So we're trying to get that balance between simplicity, one page that presents your risk profile, and detail that needs to be managed within the supporting pages.
Right, we're running slightly behind. Look, there's one further issue, and just in terms of the deep dives, and I think this is just something, Nick, maybe you can take away, but health, safety and resilience of staff. I look at that and I think, look, we're really quite good at looking after the physical safety of staff out on the job or in the building. We're not really so good at everything else. So and that, I don't think we can let that slide without remarking on it and asking for something to come back. And again, to Susie's point, not necessarily for this committee, but the point about the disconnect between the physical and all the other aspects of safety and comfort of our people, which has the risk of undermining our ability to function because it impacts on turnover, and we haven't got a measure for absenteeism yet and that sort of thing. So I think we need you to come back on that. That's my feel on that.
Just to make sure I've got that right, we put a really significant investment into well-being, so there's a whole bunch of well-being initiatives. Is that what you're?
Yeah,
what
perhaps
you're
you could,
pointing to,
you
'cause we
could
can have a
report back
articulate
to,
Yep.
to corporate and strategic next, possibly on that. It's just that there is that disconnect. It goes to the heart of, of the functioning of this organisation through the happiness and safety of our staff, outside of just making sure they, their trucks don't fall off the side of the hill. So, yeah. I think that's
And perhaps the best place for it to be is actually in here, because there's a very large investment that we've made into wellbeing, particularly since the cyclone.
Okay.
So I think probably recording that in the action plan is the right place to put it. If it's in one of these one-page action plans, it's there, and whereas if I report on it separately, it never kind of matches the system up. So if you're happy, we'll take that as an action to include in here.
Thank you.
Just to follow up on that, I appreciate, and it's good that we've got both health and safety, well-being measures. My concern is that's fine internally. Alongside is the need for health and safety and well-being measures for the rest of for the community that we serve. Give you an example of that is what does our profile of risk look like out in the community in terms of civil defence response, major events, etc. That also needs to have its monitoring and oversight and reflection in terms of health and safety. Where in this organisation can we actually be influential in that? And I go to, for example, the 10-year review of the risk assessment process and what does that look like? And we don't have a line of sight on that at a governance level, or I can gather even at a staff level. There's not a great level of interest in that particular exposure. So to me, there are these, if you like, opportunities for the services that we deliver. It might be regulatory, for example, where our highest risk regulatory environments and what do they look like, where are our physical risks to the community, where are the risks to, for example, lifelines, and how do we influence those? If we're building a stop bank or submitting to a plan as to where eroding is going, etc., have we taken into account protection of our lifelines? Those sorts of questions. So what I'm saying is, great, let's do regular monitoring update and find where the pressure points are on our staff, keeping them safe, but also over here, what are good measures to understand and react to community risk?
Nick, do you want to respond?
Big questions in there. The organisation certainly contributes to risk and hazard management across the region, and partly we do that through our physical support to civil defence. Partly we do that through our own risk and hazard work. So there are lots of elements to that. I take the point that there's value in potentially bringing all of that together. I think as we go through our strategic review, potentially of our strategic plans up for review before next year. So again, it kind of comes back to what are the priorities the organisation has, and if that is the priority the organisation arrives on, management have got a job to go away and deliver that. I think at the moment it would be fair to say we've got quite a lot of priorities to go and deliver on, and one of the things that's getting sharpened up through the LTP is which of them are we going to really focus on.
I think, Councillor, you make a really valid point, because actually what our goal at the end of the day is to keep our community safe. And if we can't measure that, then that makes achieving that goal more difficult. But I think you've got to encourage you to carry that idea forward into all of our planning.
One final comment through you, Chair. We actually have run a workshop, 2 workshops around the statement, keeping our community safe. So there is a one-page management plan developed on that, which breaks it into the contributory factors to keep the community safe and critical controls in place to address that.
Thank you, David. Right, look, we have a recommendation, and you can all see it in your papers. We're receiving and noting the report, and thank you very much for that, and staff, David and staff. Can I have a mover, please? Thank you, Stephanie, and a seconder. Job, yep. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Good. Right, I think we should I see we've got Ahmed as ready to join us, so if we can flip over to the external audit report, item 6. Item 8 online. 8. These lists always have 2 different numbers, which is not helpful. External audit report, item 6 in the paper. Item 6, right, page 17. Right, and hopefully, Ahmed, you can hear us.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Thank you.
Welcome, Ahmed, from EY. So, look, would you like to, welcome again, Susie, or we'll leave Ahmed in your hands?
Yeah, it's explanatory on item 6 and 7 in the pack, what's happening here. Ahmed is our audit director from EY that performs with David Borry, the partner. We have had them here before. What we are presenting back today is the control findings. These were given to you in draft or certainly spoken about at the last risk and audit pre-Christmas, so shouldn't be anything in here surprising, but also, Ahmed is going to take us through the audit plan for this year and what that means and the timing. So over to you, Ahmed.
Thank you, Susie. And I think I'll start with, and good morning, everyone. I'll start with the report on control findings. And I think I'll spend a bit of time on page 37 or page 2 of the report, which is the executive summary. And there, really, what we have is, at the beginning of the year, we had 8 open items. And of those 8, 7 have been closed. Sorry, 7 have been closed. And all of those 7, considering the challenges that the council have gone through last year, I think that's a really positive result. And the one that's still open is relating to the sensitive expenditure, and that I think a process have been put in place to remedy that issue. And however, we considered it open because that process took place partway during the year, so that item should be closed by now as well. And then in terms of the new items that are issued this year, apart from one which is moderate rating, the rest I'll describe them as a hygiene and factors, things that the council can improve on going forward that are not of a substantive risk. And the moderate one really relates to the community loans being able to produce a report from the system that shows at a point in time what the position of those loans are. Reconciliation is done, and we're just encouraging that a more regular reconciliation is done whilst the system fix is put in place to be able to do that. The low items, I think, mostly are related to performance reporting, and that is just saying, you're going through a three-yearly and LTP process, and although and that's kind of the time you need to think about, refreshing those if there's any improvement. So that's just to keep it timely. And the reminder are mostly around, improving the processes and systems really, so they're not as significant items. And so I think that's all I wanted to say on that report, but happy to take any comments or recommendations or feedback from the committee.
Thank you, Ahmed. Look, I'll just open up for questions. No questions? Councillor Kirk.
Thank you, Ahmed, and again reiterate that quality reporting is excellent. The ability to see what's going on at a glance is really appreciated. I just want to take you to, on my numbering, it's page 38, I think it's on your report, page 3, and that's to do with the external loan arrangements. You're saying that the process is inherently susceptible to error. Did you identify the value of that loan risk? Do we know what the dollars look like in terms of what that exposure is?
Yeah, I think if I recall, and from the audit, that's about $19 million is the total value or thereabouts, and a reconciliation was done to show all the ratepayers that those amounts relate to, and those loans are collected through the rates, so that the risk of those being uncollectible, I think, is low. But I think what we just highlighting here really is the process could be improved a bit more.
So, just following up on the collectible bit or uncollectible, did you identify the risk in terms of that ability to collect?
Not through the audit process, and on the basis that they are rates, so people pay through their rates, and to the extent that the rates are collectible, those loans are collectible, and they extend for a period of time, I think 10 years to be able to collect them. So I think the short answer really is we haven't found any issues from our audit side in terms of risks of their collectability.
Perhaps I can express the problem in a different way, and thank you for reminding us that there's about $19 million of loans outstanding. So your report showed an unexplained variance of $465,000. So the question is this $465,000 that's been lost somehow or not? And thank you, Chris, for shaking your head. And perhaps either Ahmed or Chris would like to answer that question. Thank you.
Yeah, through you, Chair. I think the issue that has been identified here is between a couple of systems that we run in the organisation. When we first started doing the sustainable community loans, 12 years ago, or something like that, it wasn't envisaged that there would be as many of them as there are currently, and an in-house bespoke system was created for that. The difficulty that we have with the number of loans that we have there is a reconciliation between that in-house bespoke system in terms of the total amount outstanding, which doesn't record an outstanding balance for each item, and our rate system, which does record the total amount outstanding. Trying to reconcile the two of those at any one point in time is quite difficult, and we end up with about a $465,000 reconciliation difference between them. When we go down to individual loans, and so when we're doing a settlement of it on a sale of a property or anything, we can reconcile individual loans very clearly between the amount outstanding, and so we can collect all of that in there. So there is no risk of collection of the loans. It's merely reconciling between two systems that are built that aren't built to talk to each other. What we have talked to Audit about is, as part of this LTP, we will be discussing whether the future of sustainable loans and everything, and we will then put in place an appropriate measure to try and improve that reconciliation depending on the council's decision about the future of sustainable loans.
Chair,
That's good.
So that's the assurance I was wanting, and I was a bit perturbed about the collectability matter, because what we're talking about is a bookkeeping issue as opposed to a risk of default.
Yes,
Is
correct.
that fair?
Yes,
And
absolutely.
we really, because of the security, the risk of default or not is very, very minimal. Would be fair?
That would be fair and accurate.
Yeah, look, so I'd simply just recast that as, and maybe a question for Ahmed, that what matters most in all this is in the integrity of our loan issuance recording, recording of those loans and the receipting of payments against it. Are you able to express confidence in that for us today, Ahmed, or is that not been fallen outside of the scope of what you looked at?
So I think from our perspective, so we have done a sample of those loans. So we've selected a number of loans where we verified the original issuance of the loan and in terms of following the cash flow, but also the ability to collect those to get to the end of the year position. So through that process, we have not found any issues in terms of the loans.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other questions? Councillor Curtin?
Same theme, just turning to the employment entitlement report issue, it's at page 7. Has there been any loss or exposure to payment of entitlements that were not due?
No, not that we're aware, not through the audit procedure. This is merely a reconciliation issue.
Reconciliation
Yeah,
issue.
in terms of the new system that was put in terms of how the payroll portion of that would calculate a employee entitlements position, we weren't completely sure that it had been set up correctly, and so a manual calculation was done over the top of it to ensure the integrity of it. Since the end of the year, we have spent time working with the payroll provider, with Tech One, and enhancing that automatic report out of there so that we are confident that that now will provide us with a better report. So in the stuff that we have done is to ensure that the figure is accurate, and we've now worked on to make sure that the automatic calculation of it is accurate as well, and we will start then be able to start using that.
Supplementary, Mr. Chair. Following up though, in that process, were there any anomalies discovered of overpayment or underpayment?
Not during that process at all. We've also been having payroll audits done of the system by external providers in terms of ensuring that our payroll system is set up to cover the Holidays Act and everything like that. And they're working through those issues, but nothing of significance has been pulled back as far as I'm aware.
Could I just follow up again? Sorry about this.
Feel free.
Given the situation during the last year, cyclone year, and I imagine that a lot of time would have been worked on stat days, etc. Are we confident that the payroll system's able to calculate those and staff are properly, their entitlements are properly identified in this process? And does your manual system that you've used ensure that there is good compliance with our obligations under entitlements?
I think in terms of the payments during the year, the payroll system is accurate and is paying people what they are entitled to as that goes through. The manual part is just a calculation of a year-end accrual at a point in time, and the confirmation of that is not about calculating individual allowances or that at a point in time. All of the calculations that are done in the payroll system are reviewed by the payroll manager and the team in there for accuracy and compliance, and as I've said, they have brought in external providers to come through and do a bit of a payroll audit as well, and I haven't heard of there have been no major issues as far as we're
Yeah, your question is different from what EY have looked at here for year-end purposes and what has been raised here. What you're asking is the effectiveness of the Tech One payroll system, I think. We've had an external review done on Tech One. We do have a Tech One provider here next week making some configuration changes to the way in which things are processed, yeah. At the moment, I can't give you an outcome of your specific question. Can I tell you? No, not today here.
No, it's okay. Every second Monday I have anxiety attacks knowing our payroll is so complicated.
Correct.
I'm assuming everyone else's as well.
Correct.
Thank you, councillor. Do we have more questions for Ahmed? Okay, I have one. It's not a question for Ahmed, it's a question for Chris. Thank you. So just the valuation of H-brick, so that's page 8 of the report, page 43 of the appendices. So the EY recommendation is that consideration should be given to obtaining updated third-party valuation of that, and this is of the future management costs, I think. Management's response is kind of, no, we don't think it's required. Can you just explain that, Chris, and a sense of the materiality of this, because we can't get any kind of sense about the quantum and whether it's a real issue or not.
So as part of valuation of the subsidiary of the CCO, part of the value is calculated of the management costs times a multiplier for the number of years that it goes forward, and I think it's about 6 that has been used in there. Our view has been that we have used a consistent multiplier as we've gone through in the past few years. We have taken on board, our actual response is saying that we've taken on board EY's comment, and we will, as part of the next year-end process, before that, go through and research as to whether that multiplier is still the most effective number to be using, and potentially try and, to respond to this next time with more detail in there to say why we're using that multiplier specifically in there. So I don't think it's saying that we believe that the number that we're using is accurate based on we've used that for a number of years, and that during this year we will reassess that to see if that is still appropriate, and then from there make sure that there is an assessment of it every year as we go forward.
Look, I'm happy with that, and I suspect at the end of the day it's not a big number in the scheme of things.
No, it's a few $100,000 at the most.
Yep. Well, look, if there are no other questions and no other comments, Ahmed, are you happy to that we've fairly traversed the control report?
Okay, and thank you, and I'll move to the audit plan, if that's okay.
Yeah, just before we do that, we just need to, we'll just pass the resolution, we'll get this control report out of the way, I think. Just tidy that one up. So we have a resolution. We have 2 resolutions: receive and consider the report and agree that the actions are adequate in the circumstances. Well, that's a process of that. Anyway, you can read the full resolutions. Do I have a mover for those? Thank you, Councillor Curtin. Seconder? Thank you, Stephanie. No, I don't think we need to talk on those. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Right. Sorry, back to you, Ahmed.
Cool. And so I'll start with page 50 of the back, which is again the executive summary. Basically, I think to highlight really, this is our audit plan, and our focus area really have not changed substantially compared to last year. So we've got 8 focus areas, and really those are listed in there, but the risk rating is mainly around based on the judgments that are involved in one of these in these areas. So we've got 2 high ratings, and 3 moderate, and 3 low rating. These remain consistent with the previous year. I'll just talk to the two high ratings and why we deem them high. And the first one really is the infrastructure assets. And obviously there is a significant balance on the council balance sheet. And last year, as a result of the cyclone, evaluation were unable to be completed for those assets. And as they were due for valuation, this year the council plans to undertake a full valuation of infrastructure assets. Because of the judgments involved in the valuation, we will be focused our audit on that area. And council will also need to assess whether the values have moved for the assets that are not going to be revalued this year. And those are the building, land and hydrology assets. And once they've done that analysis, the conclusion need to be come to whether the value have moved significantly or not. The next item I would like to talk through is the cyclone recovery and grants. So obviously there's a large amount of grants the council is handling, and either to fund its own remediation work or to distribute to other regional and other local governments and commercial entities. And we focused on this point last year, and our focus really is around the recognition of those grants in the right period, but also whether those are spent on the right projects, because there's a clawbacks on some of those grants where if you haven't spent on the right projects, then that money needs to go back to the fund provider. So those are the two high risk areas, and the rest are kind of similar to historical last year. So I think I'll stop there, and then if there's any questions from the committee.
Thank you. Open to questions.
It's on the overall.
On the overall plan.
Armin, just going to your page 2, a little bit uncertain. Under engagement fee, 3.8 million. Is that your engagement fee?
It's the materiality.
That's the material.
No,
The next
that's the materiality.
Thank you for allaying my concern.
Funny. Right. So look, I've got a general question on the timetable for this. We've had the luxury of a little bit of extra time in I think last 2 years, was it? No, this last year.
The year before.
The year before.
Not last year, we didn't have.
Right, yeah, okay. So look, noticed that we were coming down to the wire in terms of, I'm looking at page 13, well, 13 of the attachment, 14 on my screen. It looks like about a week before the end of October, the audit report will be available, and our deadline is 1st of November, the 31st of October.
Yep, there you go.
How do management feel about that?
We're comfortable with that. That is a normal time frame as we go through a council audit to put the audit report being available right close to the deadline. Audit usually like to have the ability to review any transactions right up until the minute that they're signing over there. In terms of all the preparation work from beforehand, we have already started having regular meetings with EY, discussing things. We are already talking about two of the major areas, especially the infrastructure asset revaluations, and started working on all of those with the asset management team in there. I think from EY being this their 3rd year of audit, and us having spent a huge amount of time over the last 2 years, and especially last year, in refining our year-end systems and processes and moving more and more into a monthly basis, that we are in a better position than we have been in the last couple of years of actually being able to prepare the financials up to there. So we're quite confident about being able to deliver those deadlines.
Chris?
Oh, just as a follow-up question to yours, then, I mean, I've been involved in an organisation that's missed deadlines a couple of times, but it was driven by the auditor as opposed to our organisation. That was COVID related, and so am I right that if for example, the audit threw up something, especially that was related to the cyclone, for example, reconciliation of grants and that sort of thing, then it's not the end of the world if we don't make October 31? Question, really.
I don't believe it would be the end of the world. I was just on a call the other day, and there are still 3 councils that haven't signed off their last year's audit reports. And we haven't heard of any councils being struck off or amalgamated with other ones or anything into that. I think the way that we do our audit and the approach that is taken with EY and ourselves is that we are identifying those things that may be an issue up early so that we are actually sorting those out. We have a constant dialogue with them that if anything new comes up for us as well, we give Ahmed a call straight away just to see what their view on that might be, so there's nothing that's a surprise. If something came up at the 11th hour that no one knew about or anything like that, yes, we may have to delay there, but I don't think that would be the end of the world.
No questions online. Look, I would just observe that EY and Ahmed in focusing on both identifying the sort of level of risk and judgment involved in the infrastructure and the cyclone recovery grants and focusing on those 2 big ticket items, I think you've hit the nail on the head. So look, I'm very comfortable with the risk and audit hat on that we are looking in the right places in this audit, that those are our biggest exposures in terms of our activities. And so I think that's a sensible way to look at it. I'm just scanning to see whether I've got any other. Oh, look, Ahmed. So page 10 of your proposal talks about the digital audit approach. Is there anything you'd like to tell us about that? I don't recall reading that last year. I may have just missed it, but you're talking about new ways of working there. So, but it doesn't quite explain how that works and what implications that might have practically for our staff doing audits or benefits to this organisation. Could you explain, please?
Sure. Basically, what that I think involves is over the last few years, we've been transitioning and some sections of the audit work to be more digitally oriented. So for your council, what we do really is we get a data dump of all your general ledger transactions, and we reconcile that, and then that provides us some analysis around journal entry testing to identify any unusual activities within your journals processing and so forth. And I think the amount of digital you can apply depends largely on the sort of systems you have in place, but also a trade-off between cost and benefit. And I think we're mindful of those, and we will continue to transition more tools as time progresses, once the conditions are right in terms of the payroll system and so forth.
Thank you. I had visions of Big Brother taking all our data and inferring, an AI coming over and doing all your work for you, and all the concerns about your $3.8 million audit fee evaporating because it was going to be so quick and easy. But I think that's probably the evolving space, is that systems will get smarter and smarter and drilling down to the areas of greatest concern and risk, and I think that's welcome.
Thank you.
So if there are no other questions, then we can just move on to our resolution, which is simply to receive and consider the audit plan. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor McIntosh, and a seconder. Thank you, Stephanie. All those in favour? Against? carried. Thank you. Right, which brings us, and look, and thank you, Ahmed, that was very helpful and very clear, all of that, all of your EY information is easy to digest and aligns with what we would expect in terms of an audit, so thank you.
Thank you very much.
Forward to seeing you in the coming months. And thanks, team, for being the engine that puts that in front of us. It wouldn't happen without you. Neither would the engine that sits behind morning tea, which is where we're at the moment. So we are due right now for morning tea. So Leanne, should we do that now?
Yeah.
Maybe shorten it up. We're running slightly behind, so quarter of an hour would be enough? 10 minutes? Okay, 36.
Quarter of an hour?
Yeah, 11:50 we'll reconvene. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 5, risk management policy. And Susie, lead us
And I'll
in.
ask Helen to come and help me with this. Part of the terms of reference for the Risk and Audit Committee is to approve the council risk management policy. This shouldn't be new to a number of you who have been on this committee for a while, and this is coming back through you just for endorsement and approval. What we have made is some small tweaks to some of the accountabilities, but they shouldn't be material in the overarching program. The other key thing just behind the scenes around the policy is the process that sits behind this. There is documented processes for ELT in the business to actually understand specifically how they go about doing that. One of the key things behind the scenes we've added to the process is the accountability for staff to identify and raise incidents. If you remember at the last risk and audit we had a number of incidents. Going forward, high incidents will come to this committee, and so we've pushed some accountability out to the business to capture those and ensure that they do. I'll just take it as read and happy to answer any questions, really.
Open to the floor. Yeah, so, Stephanie.
Sorry, as I flip through. It talks about actually, does it talk about it as the, sorry, I'm just trying to find my risk and audit committee. Here we go. Ensuring a culture exists that encourages transparency and open discussions on potential risks and emerging issues. And that piece I'm really interested in, because it's hard to create a process around that, around culture, isn't it? How do you see that working so that we know that there's more forward-looking analysis going on that's feeding through to us?
Yeah, great question. So I think and something I really do want to do, and I think you and I have talked about this outside of this committee, is leveraging the risk profile work that we've done in the current position that we're taking in the dashboard. But what we need to supplement that with, though, is more insights as to emerging risks and also external environment impacts that are happening, either reputationally, incidents, events globally that could impact us, to generate discussion. So risk is around generating that discussion and highlighting emerging risks to make sure that we're comfortable where their things lie. So we've got some enhancements to make. I'm not saying that we don't. So yeah, that's an evolving piece, that culture of transparency and culture of engagement and openness. So we need to leverage that new dashboard and we need to leverage emerging risks and open talk in this forum.
Councillor Curtin.
Thank you. I just want to go to the policy document itself and item number 1, policy goal or objective. When I look at that, I'm seeing those objectives not so much as objectives, but more activities or methods for implementing the policy. What I'm seeing as the goal is actually seen in the enterprise dashboard, so it's more to do with keeping our community safe or ensuring the health, safety and resilience and well-being of people. So those sorts of, that's where we're going, and here are some of the things we're going to do to try and get there. So essentially it's where do we locate and where's the best placement for our goals and objectives as opposed to the methodology for implementing.
Have you read the purpose, Neil? Can I take you back one page? What you've highlighted there is the policy details, number 1, the policy goal and objective. Can I draw your attention to the actual purpose and what the vision is that we have and the values and how this fits with that? Does that answer some of your questions on the linkages back to what we're trying to achieve?
Well, I agree. I went back to that and
sorry.
looked at it and thought I would see a clear goal statement there.
Right.
I'm not sure that I do, but when I read under, well, it says policy details, but it says policy goal or objective. I'm just trying to, immediately when I see that, I want to see, a big goal is explicitly stated that is measurable and that we can put our hand up and say, yes, we are really moving on that goal. I guess it's a document interpretation matter.
Is that a question? Oh, sorry, I don't know.
Yeah, is there a question? Do you want to reset that?
Well, have we got the right wording under one policy goal or objective? Possibly distill it down to that question. It's got policy details. Are we talking about methods to implement? Or am I just barking up the wrong tree entirely?
Councillor Curtin, I can see your point, and that possibly the wording's a little bit awkward, and that it tends to, so the policy goal or objective tends to, once you focus on that, you forget about page one. So if it was me, I would probably try and express it slightly differently. So perhaps we can ask, is it too much trouble to ask a bit of reflection on that point?
Would it be sufficient to add a top bullet point under the goal that links back to in here? Because it's really about, I guess, the primary goal is about the effective and efficient execution of our strategy and our purpose, our vision and our values, which is articulated in the first page. Would that?
I think that would solve the problem.
Yeah.
Can I, given where we're heading with the dashboard, have we got good reconciliation between the dashboard headings and the policy statement headings? Do you think we have? Have we done that exercise of making sure we've got a consistency between the two? So one drives the other, really. But I mean, the headings ought to be driven from the policy.
We can look at that. I think this is the what, and the dashboard is actually demonstrating of how we're applying the what. They are linked, but definitely we can take that away and make sure that they are linked.
So in terms of the dashboard, the starting point was the purpose, the success statements, and then the uncertainties on potentially executing on what is required of the organisation. So I think dashboard definitely fix that.
Well, just one tweak then, maybe it solves all my problems. Just take policy goal out, just take goal out. That would help.
Okay, yep.
Okay, so look, just an observation around just above that target audience, just a technical point about the inclusion of subcommittee appointees and just how in practice we may, as subcommittees of appointees are appointed, that we have a process to actually alert them to our risk management framework. So I don't see any point in, so I don't see any problem in them being, and in fact, they should be included, but I'm not aware, well, the risk is if we don't have a process of an induction process which includes a risk framework.
No problem, yeah.
Okay, so if that could be an action, that would be great. And just in terms of things that I've noted also, and at item 6, clause 6, we just note again in terms of the previous conversation earlier on this morning that council sets the risk appetite. So we've traversed that, and we are going to bring that back with some particular focus so that we can ensure that we understand how that's being articulated. Right. Do we have other questions?
I think, I don't know if it's in my version, the way that it's printed for me, but there seems to be point six sort of goes on and on for a number of pages, and then there's another 0.6. It's not substantive.
You are right.
And it also, in that final 0.6, it talks about the internal organisation for standardisation. I think that's the international organisation. And sorry, I know we've seen this before, I only just picked it up. The internal or the international?
We'll take that away and look at that, Stephanie.
If there are no other questions, we can go to the resolution. So, receiving and considering the report, thank you. That's all we're doing. So, moving from Stephanie, do I have a seconder? Councillor Curtin, all those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. So now we navigate to
Number 8.
General certification.
If I can introduce this, certainly 8, 9 and 10 actually, there's now a number of reports that will come through, starting with this one. This was a TALARC review, an external review of our effectiveness of our current quality management system against the current ISO standard. Now, we have accreditation with QMS that helps support a number of activities across the organisation, such that should any action be taken against us or challenge around how and what we do in this organisation, that we can support that with ISO accreditation and use this as a leverage and a confidence tool, really, externally and to our public. What I want to say is, despite the year we've had, this report is providing some very good assurance over some of the management practices we have in the specific business units that have been part of this review. And I will get Olivia to talk specifically on the QMS. But I think this is a good example of where there is an assurance over some of the underlying processes that we have in these business units. Over to you, Olivia, for anything extra on the review specific.
Just to highlight that the report is specific to the compliance, consents, environmental science, environmental information, the harbour master and the works group, and not all of the sections under the groups that are mentioned there. We've had this ISO accreditation for over 10 years now. We are maturing nicely, I think. There are other areas of the organisation that do use the systems supported for the QMS, but they are not ISO accredited. So I'll open the floor up to any questions.
questions. Councillor Curtin.
Can you just go over what is and isn't included in terms of processes in this TALARC report? Can you just state that again?
So what's not included is, so what teams are included in this are, it's easier to say who are included than not. So it's the compliance team, consents team, the environmental information team, the environmental science team, the harbour masters team, and the works group.
So that leaves catchments,
So regional assets
governance.
are not in there, apart from the works group. The environmental executive team aren't. The catchment teams aren't, although they are coming under the QMS system, but they're not ISO accredited, or certified rather.
Do those other areas have any form of assurance?
Sorry.
Do the ones that are not included, do they have any other form of accreditation or assurance?
Not under an ISO accreditation, certification.
So in terms of operational audits that are happening against processes, not structured in a structured way that it sits.
Yeah.
Those that sit within the system do. I guess those that outside the system, we also have a health and safety management system that also undertake operational audits, which is against processes and procedures as well.
Finance team?
The finance team have processes and they are subject to the Ernst & Young external audit review, right? So there's different methods of.
Sure. Why I'm asking that question is that earlier today we had the discussion about confidence around the rest of what we do. And I made an assumption that we had TALARC accreditation across the board. And clearly that's not quite right.
No.
For the finance team, really, when they go through so much rigorous auditing already, it'd be unusual to also have an ISO certification.
Sure. Maybe a roadmap that says each department, this is their method for control. I don't know.
I think that's an excellent idea. Just a one page says this is.
A roadmap, or would you like to understand a reconciliation of what business units are ISO accredited rather than just, I'm just
Isn't it
not sure.
simply what is the basis of assessing quality management, and just simply a one page. We have these business units, TALARC, we have, audit, the external audit takes care of these ones, and there's a gap or there's no gaps, or there's a third system for something. I think it's very, very simple, but useful. And one of the challenges we have as governments is we receive a multiplicity of reports of various parts of business. It's seldom that we get a story which coherently tells us the universe. We have even our assurance universe is not actually in the universe. It's only parts.
The assurance universe is sitting at that enterprise level, whereas we are talking about within a management system, whether it's QMS, whether it's health and safety, whether it's asset management, we're talking about documentation of the processes and I call them operational audits to distinguish. And so the expectation is, and it's a continuing maturity, but if under those management systems, the internal auditor that undertakes a review of that process finds a high finding, I would expect that to, and it is an ongoing dialogue and the maturity of the culture, to come into the risk team so that we can actually track the remediation of that if it's significant enough in terms of what has been found not to be followed in those processes.
Chair, I think we should note in particular point 4 of the executive summary. I mean, that's a big deal to achieve that sort of outcome given everything else that was going on in the last 12 months.
Look, I agree. Thank you, Councillor McIntosh. Look, I was just going to say and agree with both you and Susie that in the context of where we've been, to have such a relatively clean report, it just speaks to the fact that business as usual up to a point, and the process has been, we've had strong process underpinning it, so that process has been able to carry on, despite all the pressures that have been on staff and the organisation itself. So that's high marks, I think. I did feel the need to just talk about documented non-conformance, this question about with Works Group, whether the really low level of reporting of document non-conformance is just, so we're just simply not seeing, because all that TALARC's doing is looking at what's there, they're not looking at what's not there, although they've highlighted that maybe some not there's there. So the question for this committee, I think, is whether we're comfortable with that may be, and what does this look like on the ground? It might mean practices and Works Group, so that, construction, whatever's happening on the ground, there are issues with the way that that's carried out, but they're not being brought to light because there's either no incentive or a disincentive within Works Group to actually spill the beans, if you like. So the question is, can we do anything about that?
Sorry. The action in the talent report is actually being accepted actions have been put in place. Staff have been advised. There are new systems coming on board. The SEAM project will resolve a lot of these issues, and it was talked about at the review, and it will be reflected at the next revalidation in October this year.
So SEAM, for the purposes of this committee, is the Enterprise Asset Management System. That system has been built into Tech One. That system has the ability to track purchase orders, assets, life cycle of assets, maintenance programs, capital programs. So it's all in one system and driven through Tech One. Just for your information.
Right. So if there are no further questions, just move on to the recommendations. Receiving and considering the report. And as a committee, confirming the actions to be taken, address the findings are adequate in the circumstances. So I'm happy to move that one. And Jock's happy to second. Do you want to speak to that, Jock? Good. All those in
Other than
favour?
my earlier comment.
Right, yeah. Well done. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Helen. Thanks, Olivia. Right, moving on. Item 9, Treasury compliance, the perennial. We're getting too much money and it bounces around. Oh, it's all under control. Susie. And Jess. Welcome, Jess.
Oh, okay. This is the Treasury and Compliance report for the second quarter of our year from October to December of last year. Really, just taking you through the main things in the report is that we have these compliance measures in place to ensure that we are managing the funds and balance and debt correctly and managing the risk around that. So this is just really reporting on the compliance during that quarter. You'll note that we have a number of counterparty breaches in the last 2 quarters in particular around our counterparty credit exposure, which is to do with our credit balances in our bank accounts. And the reason for this is because of the large amounts of recovery funding that we've received during that period. Our policy limits are the 15 million in one bank, given the levels of recovery funding coming through. We've just tried to spread that as much as possible across 3 registered New Zealand banks to mitigate that risk. So, yeah, I'll take the rest of it.
Despite sharing that round, we're still breaching the limits given the quantum of debris money that came in the door all at once. And given the quantum of the new funding that was announced last weekend, we are likely going to breach these limits again when that funding is received. It's a real short term, as you know. It's a quarter by quarter. Generally, that funding, the new funding certainly that'll come in, we will look to use that, spend that, allocate that, whatever word the right word is, within the next 6 months. It's going to be a slower burn on the next money that comes in. Jess and I are of the belief that actually that money, because it's a pure in and out here, that we should remove it from our true metric, because it is, whilst triggering compliance, we are purely acting as a bank for that funding. It's in and out. Open to feedback on that measure, if I'm honest, but we believe the true accuracy is to remove that.
Stephanie.
On that last point, Susie, my query is, when was that policy last reviewed? Yeah. And is it appropriate to have a review now specific to this? Or do we make an amendment on a temporary basis to either endorse that view that you guys are taking, which I think warrants some further consideration, or whether we can set some different kinds of limits to accommodate this so that you're not constantly coming to the committee saying that there's this breach and we already know it and we can get comfortable with it?
I think at the My discussions with Treasury and the Department of Internal Affairs just on how best do we do this is that as long as it's with registered New Zealand banks, it was fine, and they generally have said it's an unlimited amount. We have that limit in place from the last LTP cycle, and that's based around what our normal spend would have been during that period. So the limits probably aren't appropriate for what we're facing for the next.
So with the LTP coming down the pipe, that LTP will have a refreshed treasury policy, financing policy, a debt policy. So we're looking to make some changes and tweaks to some of those thresholds. So we will probably look to increase it up to probably 25 million per registered bank. Knowing that it is highly unlikely that the government are going to give us $140 million, we hope, just for reimbursement purposes across Hawke's Bay. We are likely going to receive money from the Crown through our Cat 2 flood mitigation, but primarily that's going to repay debt. And, I can't, 25 million we will likely be trying to put through as the limits in the LTP.
So this is a limited point in time?
I believe it's a limited point in time, yeah.
I would say it's evidence that the policy is working.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and if it's not creating a massive burden that outweighs the benefits of monitoring, then we carry on. But that reporting limit should move over time as our business grows. So, very happy with the way it's working at the moment. Just had a question, Jess. In the past, I think the paper has been briefer, and we've actually had the unattributed Price Waterhouse report sitting in the background. This time round, I think you've just brought all the key elements of that report into your paper. Is that this just reformatting is just that's what we expect from now on?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
I quite liked that.
Yeah. And there wasn't quite a lot of duplication before, so I think it was, yeah. It's good to know and have some familiarity with that, the report that sits in behind it, but comfortable with what you're giving us. Thank you. Do we have any other questions or observations for Jess? If not, I see that the markets are moving slightly back towards us at this point in time anyway.
Favourable for this quarter, but I would say that's still pretty volatile in the managed funds.
And we're still accounting for our capital protection on the basis of 2%. Correct. So it's not it is a benchmark, but it's probably not an ideal benchmark. Susie, you...
Can I raise your attention to paragraph 29, just the cost of funds? I do want to mention that we currently do have a sort of a net cost of funds of 4.26%, which is generally quite good in the current environment. I will raise for your attention that we are progressing to seek a credit rating for HBRC. That is progressing behind the scenes with a decision to be made later this week as to the provider, having gone through an RFP for a provider. This will involve a 2 to 3 month process of on-site and sharing of information with the chosen agency that we provide, and hoping to have a decision on that circa June 2024 this year. That's going to help us continue to keep that cost of funds lower with the outcome that we are hoping for in line with other councils. That's going to bring with that some risk. Quite different in local government in terms of credit notch downgrades, implications for holding capital and liquidity is quite different from a financial services institution. So we believe taking on a credit rating for this organisation is a much lower risk for us. A notch downgrade will result in a lower rate applied, as opposed to a capital liquidity holding position that we have to take. But I just wanted to let you know that we are progressing behind the scenes with that, as per approval at the last CNS to push forward with that.
Can I just ask, so the route will be once we have an offer or we have a preferred provider, then that will come back to CNS for a final decision?
No, the final decision as to the provider will be a management one at this stage. That is obviously based on a number of criteria, primarily around outcome and the price. We will be assessing those with PricewaterhouseCoopers, and management will make that decision on the provider that we take.
As I recall, we were very comfortable with the direction. I just can't remember exactly where we left it in terms of the resolutions that we signed at CNS, but that sounds all very good. Thank you.
Just also on the bad memory category, can you remind me, please, the extent of relief we expect to get interest rate wise when getting a credit rating? I know you can't be definitive about that, but I'm just thinking of it in context of, say, 4.26% at the moment.
It's about 20 basis point savings on current.
Dependent on your rating.
Exactly, it's dependent on your rating. But the more we have quite a lot of debt repricing. If you look at some of the maturity profile in item 9, page 25, you'll note we've got some quite big amounts coming down the pipe around repricing. We also have our current LTP and our debt predictions, obviously for the Cat 2 flood mitigation. So we have quite a large number of debt that we're expecting to take on. So 20 basis points on sort of circa 75 million over the next 4 years is quite a substantial number.
Thank you. There are no further questions. Go to the recommendation. So we're just receiving and noting the report. Do I have a mover for that? Thank you, Stephanie. A seconder? Thank you, Neil. Yep. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you, Jess. Right. Item 10, data analytics. Another very dense subject.
Yeah, so if I can introduce this one. So this data analytics report is undertaken every year, and we primarily use this as a deep dive identifier mitigation against fraud, potential conflicts, and it's a way to provide assurance that we have some good oversight process control over our spend. I actually would like to thank the team on this one. This during a year where we have put through nearly $200 million of extra payments through our GL as a result of the cyclone. This is a very good result. And yet again, similar to the last report we looked at, is another demonstration of where this is assurance over some of our critical processing and fraud risk areas. Anyway, I'm going to hand it over to Chris and Olivia to just give some insights as to what was looked at and some of those outcomes.
Yeah, thank you. I think that the key thing to note in here, there are a number of sort of larger numbers of items that they picked up. A lot of those are to do with some of the data that was provided into the data to Crow around the approvers for different expenditure. One of the things that we have learned through this audit is that we will need to work on the data that's provided to them next year. One of the things that we make sure that we do is that the data is provided by our ICT team, not by the finance team, so that there is a clear desegregation of duties in there to actually make sure that we are not touching the data before it goes to Crow. They do their analysis of that, and then they provide back all of the information where they have identified things that may be indicators of something that is out of the normal. a lot of the indicators were around an approval process where another data field, when we looked at all of these expenses and purchase orders that came through, there was the appropriate approval on there. So that'll be one of the things that will fix it next year, and the numbers will go down significantly. Once all the information comes back, our team leader of payroll and our team leader of finance team go through all of the items that have been identified, every one of them, look through as to what the reasons are in some spreadsheets, put all of those reasons down. That is then reviewed by some of the senior finance team and myself to go through to identify if we've got any issues from there. Everything, as you can see in the report, everything that has come back has not identified anything that would indicate any fraud or anything out of the ordinary, other than a couple of things that we knew about in there. So again, I think it's a good indication that the systems and processes are working well there. And as Susie said, in a year where we had a huge number of extra stuff going through there, I'm really proud of how this has come back and the work that the team have done.
Open for questions. Councillor Curtin.
Just, has there been a look back at some of these items look familiar from previous reports. Has there been a reconciliation with previous reports?
Yes, an item in paragraph 13, 14, 15, I mentioned how it compared to the last one. The difficulty this time, in previous reports, I have reported on numbers of differences. The difficulty this time was because of the data extract, the numbers were quite a little bit meaningless in terms of the number of unauthorised POs that were identified last time compared to the ones this time. But going through everything in there, I came up that basically pretty much everything was improving on the previous year. There were some areas that we would that we knew that we could see that we needed to take away and work on, but it wasn't unusual. There wasn't anything that was sort of suddenly becoming an issue compared to previous years.
Questions?
Just a related question to Councillor Curtin's. Talks about on page 4, I think, of the report, 2.2b and 2.3, the specific items that were picked up in the 2022 report. So one of the records, I think, is identified in the earlier report. I take it that's the same issue, perhaps wasn't rectified, may have been missed. Is that, am I reading that right?
Yes.
Okay. And then the 7 duplicate vendors, were that in the next 2.3, are they the same ones that were picked up last time, or are they different vendors that have been picked up
Those are
this time?
different.
Different.
So, yeah, so there were 58 duplicate addresses picked up this time. There had been 7 picked up previous time. Those 7 had been corrected. There were 58 new ones that came in. That for that particular one, it identified one of our processes that in terms of they were just similar vendors that had been set up multiple times. That was one of the big things that came out of this audit, was we have a process in our system whereby individual managers, if they can't see a vendor when they're looking to raise a purchase order, they can put in to create a new one. We've added additional checks in the finance team to stop to do more checks where the name might be slightly different or stuff like that, to try and limit where we get duplicate vendors for the same company into there.
I just had a question of clarification. In the exec summary, it just talks about master data, and the first sentence talks about perform specified tests to detect specific transactions and the master data. So I was just trying to understand what master data is. I think it's actually the master data is just a download of the database, or the entire database presumably, which includes the transactions that have occurred in a period plus the details of counterparties and that sort of thing.
Yeah, usually when they talk about the master data, so they'll talk about the transactional data, then the master data will be each of those vendors with their bank account numbers, their IRD numbers, their business NZBN numbers, all of those things. So it's a master data for a specific vendor or employee that you wouldn't have on every transaction.
And do we have a separate assurance around the integrity of that?
But that's part of the checks here, so it's looking at the master data for employees versus vendors and seeing which vendors have the same bank account as an employee, and looking for, okay, could there be a risk of, corruption, conflict of interest or anything like that into there, that may have been undisclosed.
Okay, so just trying to think through that. But so if there was a completely fictitious vendor, your test wouldn't actually demonstrate that they were fictitious. You'd only pick up a duplication. However, there would have to be collusion within the organisation to generate POs and that to actually take use of that. So, no system is perfect against collusion, but each part's robust. Yeah.
A review like this is a really good way of trying to pick up those sorts of things, because they're the little things that someone didn't think about of actually, yes, it goes through, but I've used the same bank account as I get my salary paid into, or something like that, or I've set up a couple of companies and they both have the same bank account, and those are the sort of things that will pick up these things. When we look through them, our team know all of the vendors and stuff like that, so anything that jumps out at them there, they can say, yep, that's absolutely fine. That's stuff that we get from the husband of this person that's in here, and we know that they work through a different area, or that there's always a different person that's authorising the expenditure.
Thank you. So, I don't sense the need for any more. I don't sense the requirement for any more questions. So we can move on to the recommendations that we receive and consider. We've done that, we've considered it. Are we going to adopt the report? And is it the right?
You don't need to adopt it, no, you just confirm that the actions taken to address the findings are adequate.
Okay, so we're just receiving, considering and confirming the actions.
Yeah.
Do I have a move before that? Thank you, John. And a seconder. Thank you, Stephanie. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Dashboards. 45, we're going okay for time. Olivia, do you want to tell us about this one?
Morning.
Welcome back.
Afternoon. As you see on the paper, you have 3 dashboards, the corrective actions, which are the follow-up from audits that have been done throughout the last few years. You've also got the audit universe, which gives you a look back and a look forward of what audits and reviews we've carried out and want to carry out in the future. And also then on the last page, you have a dashboard, which is the assurance plans that's a look back for 22-23 and looking forward 23-24. Any questions?
Yeah, Stephanie.
Thanks, Olivia. I've got a few questions. So first one on attachment 1 on the HR side of things, succession planning piece. It seems to me that you're talking about 2 sides of the same coin when you're talking about.
Sorry, which?
The succession planning
This one.
is behind.
Talent management.
Yep. That's one that's behind. It seems to me it's 2 sides of the same coin, looking at succession planning and that being delayed because of recruitment activity. Because I wonder when you'll ever be able to get there. So my query is around what you're looking at to be able to address freeing up your HR specialists to be able to spend that time on developing and implementing that best practice HR. That's something you're able to talk to?
I can, I'm going to have to delay the response to that, unfortunately, without Nick in the room on this one. We are in a position at the moment of taking on board new staff as a result of our Category 2 flood mitigation program. So succession planning and identifying critical roles will also pop out, no doubt, of some of these response reviews and flood reviews as well. So we've got a bit of work to do in there. That is delayed, but I'm going to have to get Nick to give a formal response on that one. But yeah, the position we're in is a hard one at the moment, competing with resources across Hawke's Bay to enable good succession planning, to ensure through the LTP we have allocated budget for development and competency frameworks and upskilling. So it's a tricky scenario unfolding in that space.
And I can see that your HR, or however you refer to them, the people in capability, that they've got real skills that could be adding real value to that scenario, and being tied up with recruitment, which is also necessary, is a tricky one. Okay, so we'll wait to hear back on that one, thank you. My other query was around the insurance universe and whether there's some more detail that's going to flow through into the items for 24, 25, because it seems to me that there are some gaps in these key areas of uncertainty in terms of how that's going to flow through into the assurance piece and where that fits there. Can you talk me through that?
Do we talk to that? Yeah. So with the internal audit plan, that is actually an item that's going to have to come forward to the next meeting. So it'll go through the executive team as well. They'll input into it, and then it's for you to finalise those reviews that will be presented, depending on what the internal audit trends are, what our risk profile's looking at like. We will bring that forward to the next meeting.
Right, so we're not signing off on?
No.
Okay, thank you.
It was that sort of reflects some discussions that have happened along the way, but it's certainly not the finalised plan, because that will be next meeting.
Thank you.
Councillor Curtin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great minds think alike, Steph. I just want to go to succession planning and ask the question. I thought we had an action to do a scoping or auditing or potential internal recruitment or upskilling into broader roles. Has that been closed? Has it been done? Has it been closed off? Or is it actually incorporated into one of these?
Fortuitously, Leanna Monteith has walked into the room. I'm not sure if someone has done an urgent message to her. Thanks, Leanna, for tuning up. I've just attempted to answer something on your behalf, but here's another question. Do you want to go back to the other question while Leanna's here as well?
I've got it in my mind that as a part of setting actions in the talent management area, that we were going to do, if you like, a scope or an audit of current staff to examine what their abilities, capabilities were, skill sets were to move into other roles. Might be sort of a...
Like succession.
Well, it's not so much succession planning, but it's more talent management, knowing who we've got, and given the paucity of recruitment opportunities externally, what could we do internally to develop the skill sets?
So we had a bit of a change of tact probably near the end of last year. You may recall we were going to be looking at some sort of training across the organisation as more what people would often describe as soft skills, and then the executive team gave me another sort of steer in terms of we need to be looking at technical training skills instead. we've started that process, and we're about 3/4 of the way through meeting with all the managers across the organisation to identify, based on every single job, what technical skills are required and then from there, we have to analyse it to work out the gaps. And that will identify the capability, I guess, of the team and the organisation. But as I said, we're only 3/4 of the way through gathering that information, because it means meeting individually with each manager and going through every job description. So the work started. It's a big piece of work, but from that will flow a whole lot of other pieces of work, updating job descriptions. You will be able to identify some talent gaps, perhaps. And it should actually lead on to, we would hope, better recruitment, because we can identify what are the skills missing within that particular team. We should be recruiting for that.
Okay. In terms of this report, was that an action we'd identified, or have I just made that up? And two, can it be, if so, and it looks like it's an ongoing thing that's current.
It is part of what was originally identified,
Yep.
which is the succession planning. But at the moment, with recruitment being so high and turnover being higher than we would like,
yes, it's
I think the
dropped
decision was made, let's look at technical training and then we can concentrate on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Therefore, do you think it's useful to put it back into our framework and monitor that over time?
It's definitely still in the HR plan.
Okay, but it's not appearing here.
No, I think, sorry, Councillor Curtin, I take it as the one that's behind, is that work around the succession planning, gathering technical information training.
So under the broad heading, I don't see it as succession planning, I see it as something slightly different.
It's kind of all connected. And at the moment, I have to say, with the turnover being as it is, it's what I don't want to do is spend all my time focusing on succession planning and then people just going when we're actually not capturing what we need in terms of skill sets.
I see succession planning as this manager's in this position, if they go, who can step up to that role, as opposed to across the organisation, is there someone with some skills that are doing reception, and in fact they've actually got a qualification in something that they could be doing over here, sort of slightly different approach, if you like.
I'd say we do that informally. We don't have a system or process set up to do that formally, because we haven't done the piece of work around the succession planning. And I've been looking at what I've just written in there, that we were actually looking at a digital solution for that, but right now we just can't afford that.
Okay.
Otherwise, again, it's a manual process of meeting with all the managers, sitting down with them and putting it on a matrix in terms of where the skills are. But I think if we focus on the technical skills first, that should help a little bit, and we'll get much more of an understanding of what we need, and then the gaps should start to show,
Okay.
I believe. Yeah.
Does it involve asking across the organisation, for example, a person on reception that actually happens to have a Bachelor of Science in Environmental something, do we know that? No.
Only by looking at individual CVs, which we keep, but we don't have a system where we can actually, we don't have an electronic system where we can actually, when someone joins, we can actually say, and they're a lawyer. Oh, and that would be great, but we don't have that. So we don't have an HRIS system at all. It's all manual.
Supplementary a little bit to that is, if you like, the pool going a bit wider, is there the potential to have some sort of identification of people out in the community who we identify as someone that has a skill set we'd be quite interested in? No, it's okay.
The only thing, I guess, one thing I can say, the other thing we're working on, again, it's all a work in progress, is, and I may have told you a while ago that we're looking at an alumni. So we thought we'd create an alumni, but then from the advice from our own comms teams, they said use LinkedIn instead. So we're actually the idea was that we would have connections to all ex-employees who may either want to come back, and so they'll have a connection to the careers page, or they'll know someone that they might be sitting next to that's willing to come to Hawke's Bay. So we are working on that. That's going to happen. And those are the people with the specific skills or networks that could be advantageous to us.
Thank you. Look, I'm just conscious that those online who are showing great perseverance, just to assure you, one thing you're not having to put up with is the smell of the food that is on the other side of the room now, which is testing our resolve. So, look, I think we're just about at the end with the dashboards. Does anyone have any further comments or questions? I have one, but... okay, I will go with mine, and it's just the assurance dashboard. Hang on, which one? The assurance universe and the plans for assurance for the next two financial years. Look, I'm just going to disclose my view here that there are some quite big gaps, and there are some. And this dovetails in with the challenge that we face in our budgeting, so our LTP, and setting and prioritising for this organisation, and looking at different ways that we can achieve same or similar or better outcomes. And what we have by default with our system is what I see as a very additive approach, where we add a program, we add another program, we add another program, right? And those programs are quite resilient, and the funding that goes with them and their way of doing things is quite resilient once it's embedded. And this whole process leads us to being less potentially flexible and a little bit shuttered or blinkered in our view about how to achieve the outcomes in the community that we're trying to achieve. So I think this, to my way of understanding and trying to work with this system called local government, the Section 17A reviews that probably give us the most opportunity to look at, in a disciplined way, other ways that we could contemplate achieving the same ends. And so it's my ambition, that being, and I see lots of nodding heads, which gives me some encouragement, to use that process to look at some of our bigger items of spend, just see whether there are other ways we could do things smartly. Because we've got some massive programs which take up a gigantic, the lion's share of our rates at the moment. So every time it comes back to rates, and we go, how can we do that differently? I have some ideas, and I have some experience from my previous life that suggests that actually there are other ways to, if we're clear about what the goals are in the community, particularly in the pastoral sector, we can do things differently, cheaper, and actually do more. So this is me signalling that I want to be involved. I think there's value throughout the organisation and through our LTP planning and having a serious look at what we're planning these reviews and some of their big ticket items. That's what I want to say today. Thank you. And with that, to the recommendation, receiving and noting the dashboard's updates and confirming that we've provided adequate organisation on the status. So do I have a mover for that one? I'm happy to move that. Do I have a seconder? Job. Thank you very much. So all those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. We're just about there. So now what we have to do, I think, Leanne, we've reached the point where we need to go into public excluded, and this is merely for, there's no new items to consider, it's just to ratify the minutes, accept the minutes.
That's correct, yes.
So for any hardy souls still online, it's just a matter of tidying up from our last meeting. So can I have a mover, please, to go into public excluded? So Councillor Curtin, and a seconder. Thank you, Stephanie. All those in favour? Against? Carried.